Jordan, Minister of Labor, Social Security, and the Third Sector, and Parliamentary Representative for St. Peter, Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM, and our distinguished guest speaker, His Excellency, Mr. Wayne McCook, Assistant Secretary General, Office of Trade Negotiations, CARICOM, Professor Clive Landis, Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor, the UWI Cave Hill Campus, Mrs. Julie Arthur, wife of the late Professor the Right Honorable Wayne Arthur, and members of the Arthur family, Dr. Jean Leon, President, Caribbean Development Bank, Professor Justin Robinson, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Board for Undergraduate Studies, the UE, Senator Dr. Christina Hines, Head of the Department of Government, Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology, members of the panel, Professor, the Most Honorable Eugene Barreto, former Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal, the UE Cave Hill Campus, Dame Billy Miller, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Barbados, members of the university community, representatives of CARICOM, representatives of the Caribbean Development Bank, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everyone. It is my signature pleasure and delight to welcome you all to this, the second Distinguished Owen Seymour Arthur Memorial Lecture, which we host annually with our sister organization, the Caribbean Development Bank. I am Janive Remy, Director of the Srinath Ramphal Center for International Trade Law, Policy and Services, and your MC for this evening's proceedings. While this is not the inaugural lecture, it is the first time we are hosting it in person. Last year, the pandemic robbed us of the feeling of being together in person to celebrate the memory of a man who left us too early and who was for many a visionary, and for me personally, who met him in the sunset years of his life, an academic politician. To welcome you formally to this second memorial lecture, let me welcome Principal of the Cave Hill Campus and Chair of the Srinath Ramphal Center's Board, Professor Clive Landis.
I'm obviously not very good at taking directions. Master of Ceremonies, Dr. Janive Remy, Director of the Srinath Ramphal Center for International Trade Law, Policy and Services. The Honorable Colin Jordan, Minister of Labor, Social Security and the Third Sector, and Parliamentary Representative for St. Peter. Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM and our distinguished speaker tonight. His Excellency, Mr. Wayne McCook, Assistant Secretary General, Office of Trade Negotiations, CARICOM. Mrs. Julie Arthur, wife of the late Professor the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, and members of the Arthur family. Dr. Jean Leon, President of the Caribbean Development Bank. Professor Justin Robinson, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Board for Undergraduate Studies. Senator Dr. Christina Hines, Head of the Department of Government, Sociology, Social Work and Psychology. Members of the panel, Professor the Most Honorable Eugene Barreto, former Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal, the UE Cave Hill Campus, Dame Billy Miller, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Barbados. Members of the university community, alumni, representatives of CARICOM, representatives of the Caribbean Development Bank, specially invited guests. members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a very pleasant good evening all. What an honor it is to welcome everyone to the occasion of the second annual Distinguished Owen S. Arthur Memorial Lecture, and an extra pleasure because I am able to welcome you in person. Please let me offer a very special welcome to the many members of the Arthur family here this evening. And let me be the first among the platform party to congratulate Leah Arthur on behalf of the campus on her achievement last month in being admitted to the bar at the Honorable Society of the Middle Temple. Congratulations. As a community of scholars within the leading regional university in the world, it feels so right for us to be honoring the memory of one of the Caribbean's most outstanding citizens, not only Barbados' longest-serving Prime Minister, but a tireless champion of regional integration and economic advancement. This honor is even more profound when we consider that this remarkable statesman was an integral part of the UWI as a student, a lecturer, and finally as professor of practice in economics of development. Moreover, his relationship with the UWI did not diminish, but instead flourished during the 14 years in which he served as Prime Minister of Barbados. Professor Owen Arthur was well known as a strident regionalist and a relentless advocate for the advancement of the CARICOM single market and economy, the CSME. You will no doubt be hearing first-hand accounts of Owen Arthur's impact on Caribbean integration and the development movement this evening. But suffice it to say that from our side, as an academy, so impactful was his work in and for the region that we immortalized his legacy with the renaming of our CARICOM building at Cave Hill to the Owen Arthur CARICOM Research Complex, fittingly located in the CARICOM Research Park. I should mention that I worked in this building a few doors down from Owen Arthur's office when I was Pro Vice Chancellor, Board for Undergraduate Studies. I cherish the memory of the day that Owen Arthur, with eyes gleaming, showed me his incredible collection of papers from his time in public office. This is a truly remarkable and important collection of papers, voluminous, beautifully bound, well organized, and indexed. I am issuing a standing invitation for researchers near and far to contact the Cave Hill Sidney Martin Library for anyone who is interested in studying this unique collection. It is an absolute treasure trove, and it is ready for research. This evening, we further celebrate Owen Arthur's work with the Distinguished Owen Arthur Memorial Lecture Series. In the inaugural Distinguished Lecture, Dr. Hyginus Jean Leon, President of the Caribbean Development Bank, gave a highly apposite lecture on redesigning economic growth strategies, outlining policy prescripts for the region as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and aligned with the vision and legacy of the late Owen Arthur. Today, the mantle has passed on to Her Excellency, Dr. Carla Barnett, the current and first female Secretary General of CARICOM and proud UWI alumna. Appropriately, Dr. Barnett has previously stated that a major consideration in going forward for the region is striving to make a difference in the lives of our youth. Madam Ambassador, as one who heads a regional university comprising a large constituency of young people, I readily identify with and endorse your statement that, and I quote, "Our young people are central to our efforts at building a sustainable and resilient society. We must, therefore, never cease in our attempts to create opportunities to develop and utilize their creativity and innovative skills, and to explore avenues to facilitate youth involvement in planning and preparation for the future." End quote. In keeping with this vision for the region, this evening's lecture is aptly titled The Future of CARICOM, Charting a Vision for the Region's Economic Advancement. This is a suitable subject of inquiry given the global challenges of pandemic recovery, climate change, and economic fallout from the Russia-Ukraine war facing the Caribbean and the rest of the world at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, the UWITV campus is truly honored and delighted to facilitate the annual Distinguished Owen S. Arthur Memorial Lecture Series as a lasting tribute of this astute politician and committed regionalist, the late Right Honorable Professor Owen Arthur, who gave so much to the Caribbean. I'm truly grateful to the Arthur family for working with the Shridath Ramphal Center for International Trade, Law, Policy and Services, and the Caribbean Development Bank in developing this distinguished memorial lecture series, which is fast becoming a fixture in the UWI calendar and a central viewing for policymakers and leaders of Barbados and the Caribbean. To Dr. Barnett, I wish to officially extend a very warm welcome to you as this evening's featured speaker. We look forward to your insightful submission and an absorbing discussion on how best the Caribbean can chart its way forward to a sustainable future. Again, I welcome all of you to the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus and look forward to an engaging and enlightening evening. Thank you.
I hope I'm not abusing my prerogative as Mistress of Ceremonies to also extend a very short welcome as co-host of the event with the Caribbean Development Bank. Thank you so much, Professor Landis. Last year, when we reached out to the CDB to partner with us, we could think of no one better to inaugurate the lecture series than the then newly installed President, Dr. Jean Leon. Sir, I remember vividly your methodical enunciation of your thesis, as Professor Landis described it, which blended Arthur's quest for a new paradigm driven by innovation, entrepreneurship, and technological sophistication with your own musings and intentions for guiding the thinking of the bank. I am grateful that the stars, and I suspect Prime Minister Arthur, conspired to make sure that a serendipitous crack emerged in your busy schedule to have you here with us tonight. I don't have the deeper and longer memories of many of you assembled to commemorate PM Arthur tonight, but I do have indelible flashes of him that will last for my lifetime. He was, above all, in my view, a pragmatist, but with a mind wide open to ideas. He may not have thought himself such, but I believe he was a feminist. I've learned that he gave many, many young women littered around the region and in the world today a start in their political and academic journeys or a grand push along the way. And he certainly pushed the SRC forward. More than just raising our profile, he pricked, challenged, prodded, harnessed trade to be more responsive to the needs of smaller countries. He didn't just study its premises and theoretical underpinnings, but he used his sharp mind to interrogate and bend it to the ends of the region. I often wonder what he would have made of the challenges of today. As a Caribbean integrationist, I know he would have had ideas about the best industrial policy for CARICOM to pursue. Intuitively, he understood that industrial policy would see a resurrection in a post-pandemic reality. He would have welcomed our homegrown economic pieces on regional import substitution, authored by Professors Moore, Lord, and Dr. Aline, as well as thinking by the likes of Mazzucati and Roderick, and even some of our own students in the Masters International Trade Policy who continue to rethink the tenets of new industrial policy. And I would have loved to hear his take on the climate change framework for financing adaptation efforts of the region. It would have been the perfect opportunity to meld his academic knowledge in economics and finance with his political acumen and diplomacy. as a regional statesman. Tonight, I am proud of the wonderful lineup that the CDB and the SRC, in collaboration with the CARICOM Secretariat, have curated for you with the support of all of the University of the West Indies campus. It thoughtfully reflects a blend of things that I think he would have found endearing: young people, academics, his family, and of course, the main food to feast on tonight by our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Barnett. As CARICOM turns 50, and now that you have settled into your new job fully, Dr. Barnett, I believe tonight's event are the hottest tickets in town as you delineate your vision and crystal ball for how we can maneuver and thrive. So without further ado, let me now welcome to the podium, it is my pleasure, the ministerial representative, the Member of Parliament for St. Peter, Minister Colin Jordan, Minister of Labour, Social Partnership, Relations, and the Third Sector. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Remy, Mistress, as you indicated, of ceremonies. Her Excellency, Dr. Carla Barnett, His Excellency, Mr. Wayne McCook, Professor Clive Landis, Mrs. Arthur, Dr. Jean Leon, Professor Justin Robinson, Senator Dr. Christina Hines, members of the panel, Professor the Most Honorable Udine Bartow, Dame Billy, or Elder States Lady, UWI faculty, alumni, CDB personnel, specially invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all good evening to you. It is really a distinct honor for me to have been asked to share reflections on the life and the contribution of one who I've long admired, respected, and attempted to emulate. It really hit me in 2011 when, in a heated argument, it wasn't a discussion, it was an argument with someone who I'd known since I was 16 and who was at that point a minister of government. He and I were robustly disagreeing on a matter of policy. I was the president of the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association at the time. And I think in an effort to escape the engagement, he shouted out, "Man, you are an Owen Arthur man." Owen Arthur's name had not been mentioned, but I think my friend obviously remembered my orientation and the arguments we've had throughout our teenage and early adult years while studying at the BCC and here at UWI Cave Hill. Professor Arthur and I were different in a number of ways. And these are some personal reflections, and I'll also add some constituency reflections. Our diet was very different. He has passed not understanding how it is possible for anybody to have lived as long as I've lived and not have eaten a product from a pig. Anybody who knows Mr. Arthur knows his diet, and he and I were very different where that was concerned. Obviously, we had some height differences as well, but we also had, it appears, some differences in terms of the construction of our tongues. Mine, as far as I am aware, quite rounded normally, but he would often say to me, "Colin, my tongue is sharpened on both sides." I must confess, in spite of the fact that that is a significant difference, that from time to time I come across persons who I believe could actually benefit from what I refer to as an Ornartha assortment of words and expressions. But our tongues are different. We also shared some similarities. We are from the same village. We are both products of Rose Hill in St. Peter. We shared a love for economics and a deep love for St. Peter. We both spent some time at Harrison College, he to study for his A-levels after leaving Courage-and-Parry, and I before leaving to study my A-levels at the Barbados Community College. But he had a very special love for Courage-and-Parry, and we invited him to deliver a lecture, not a lecture, do a presentation, a speech, really, at an annual general meeting of the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association. And the script that he approved for his bio indicated that his schooling was at All Saints Primary, Courage-and-Parry, and the University of the West Indies. Now, I was a little bit unhappy at the fact that he didn't mention Harrison College. I asked him about it, and Mrs. Arthur, up to today, he has not answered me. But that is also typical Ornatha. Sometimes he ignores you to actually, he answers through ignoring. Time does not permit me to go into detail on Professor Arthur's contribution, but I'll reflect briefly on some of the ways he's impacted me, and then, as I said before, I'll share some of his constituency achievements. I first heard of Ornartha while a young boy, I was a young boy, in 1981. I heard of this person from my village who, along with others, would help youngsters with their homework at what we call Julian the Mile and a Quarter Corner. I heard a lot about that in 1981. I learned of a bright young man who left Barbados to go to Jamaica to study, and who had now come back, returned to his homeland to help the country and to help with its development. And he had done this at a time when the country and the world was facing economic recession. Some of us will remember the early 1980s. His impact on me was stronger than I realized. I decided, and I hadn't made the connection, but I decided that I wanted to study economics. Not offered at Harrison College at the A-level, advanced level, I went to the Barbados Community College so that I could have A-level economics included in what I was studying, and then after that registered at the UE Cave Hill campus to study for BSc in economics. While at Cave Hill, whenever he was going to be speaking in a budget debate, the group that I was a part of, I think Professor Robinson would remember some of those persons in that group. We would either go to the Students' Union to watch his presentation, or we would find ourselves in the public gallery of the Parliament buildings to listen to him. Professor Arthur, I called him Prime Minister all the time, loved to give advice. On the morning, and I remember this vividly, it was a Sunday morning before what was to be my first appearance on a political platform. He walked me through the dynamics of the location. He did it in detail. He indicated the position of the platform. He indicated the perspective, the direction I would be looking in. This was in Carlisle Car Park. Dame Billy would understand what I'm saying. He explained the impact of the sea, the careenage in front of me. He spoke to me about the impact of the lighting. He told me where I should focus my attention, and then he proceeded to speak to me about the content of what I should share in that presentation. I will also add that he, in a roughish kind of tone, indicated to me that I should not allow myself, as a former president of the BHTA, to allow anybody to restrict me to 10 minutes. And I understood by his tone how I should proceed, how I should have proceeded. I think I actually spoke for about 13 or 14 minutes. I thought I needed to exceed 10, so I did not incur his wrath. The impact on me, though, is that since becoming minister, I was asked to give some remarks to an organization, and those who reached out to me indicated through an intermediary before they sent the official letter that they wanted me to speak only for 5 minutes. I remembered Prime Minister Arthur, and I told the intermediary that that instruction would never have been given to a prime minister, and that when the letter comes, I do not expect to see such a restriction, otherwise I would not be accepting the invitation. And I thought, as I said that Prime Minister Arthur would have been proud to hear a much more soft-spoken person than he actually standing up in that way. One other story. At an event to distribute computer tablets to Class 3s at one of our primary schools in St. Peter, the designated time came, and one of the principals who was to attend the event was not there. Prime Minister Arthur asked me to call the principal and to tell him to get there immediately. Well, I said to Prime Minister, I am not the Member of Parliament, and I don't think I have the authority to call the principal of a primary school and to give such an instruction. Prime Minister Arthur said to me that I had the authority because he had given me the authority. I called and I spoke as nicely as I could to the principal and asked him to be there as quickly as he could. Prime Minister Arthur was a stickler for punctuality. A stickler for punctuality. He asked me to deputize for him at many events that he had been invited to, and he was very deliberate in allowing me to be seen as my own person and as a future representative for the constituency. Allow me to share just some of his constituency achievements. In housing development, St. Peter thinks of Black Bess Terrace, Boscobel Terrace, Diamond Corner, Welchtown, Four Hills Development, French Village Development, Leslie Gardens, Mount Brevotor Hall South, then Mount Brevotor Hall North, Golden Mile, Viewmont, and Whitehall Meadows. That is not Barbados. I was only referring to St. Peter. Educational institutions. Those of us in St. Peter remember the All Saints Nursery. We remember the All Saints Primary, which was a new plant, but an amalgamation of All Saints Girls, his beloved All Saints Boys, and the Indian Ground Primary. We remember Gordon Greenwich Primary, an amalgamation, a new plant as well, an amalgamation of my beloved Black Bess Primary and the St. Boniface Primary. We also remember Roland Edwards Primary, again, new plant, an amalgamation of the St. Peter's Girls and the Spikestown Boys Schools. And again, I'm referring only to St. Peter. And then there were other educational institutions, the Alma Paris Memorial Secondary, the Edna Nichols Center, and we also remember the resource centers at Spikestown and Black Bess. In terms of infrastructure, roads in Collins and the Spikestown Bypass Road, which we subsequently renamed in honor of Sir Kieran R. Husbands, the first Black Speaker of the House of Assembly. In public transport, we remember the Spikestown Bus Terminal, built as it was to accommodate not just publicly owned public transport, but also privately owned public transport. And me being able to get the privately owned into a facility that was built to accommodate them was also a fulfilling of his intention. In terms of citizen security, the relocating of the District E police station from, as he would intimate, from looking down on the people to being among the people. For the people's enjoyment, there's the Esplanade, there's the boardwalk, and the Speightstown Jetty. In relation to tourism, there is Port St. Charles, there's Port Ferdinand, and there is Schooner Bay. In addressing flooding, Prime Minister Arthur would always say, "A flood brought me in. I do not want a flood to take me out." And so he was able to complete phase 1 of the Speightstown flood mitigation project, which was canalizing the salt pond. We were able, in his honor, also to complete phase 2 of that. In relation to heritage, twinning with Reading in the UK and in Charleston in South Carolina. These are just some of his constituency achievements. And I've not spoken, and time does not allow me to speak, about the impact of these developments on St. Peter and the wider north of Barbados. He represented us well for 34 years. St. Peter cannot and will not forget Owen Seymour Arthur. You may by now be getting a glimpse of the legacy that I am trying hard, attempting to follow and to build upon. Almost a daunting task. Mr. Arthur entered elective politics with a clear vision. In his words, to stop poor people from being poor. And beyond that, to oversee the development of both his parish and constituency and his country. This became his life work, and he remained fully engaged in this work until he passed away from us. His foreign, political, and economic policy stance, it is summed up in 3 words. His words, Massa Day Done. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me a final personal reflection. As I work through the process of revitalizing the National Insurance Scheme, which falls within my ministerial portfolio, I often think of what he would say to me, how he would advise me were he alive and around. The answer I've come up with is the answer that he often gave to me and to many others. Before he got into the details, he would have said, "Colin, face it and fix it." I thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. I am sure you have done PM Arthur proud and especially took up his piece of advice never to be confined in terms of anybody saying to keep it short. I had to tease you, but it was well worth it. I think we're regaled again by PM Arthur. You reminded us from a personal perspective, and you ended with just all that account of the things that he has done for his constituency and for the country, and for you personally as a member of Parliament. So thank you so much for these words. Let's move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the reading of the Essential Owen. And I would ask Professor Justin Robinson, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Board of Undergraduate Studies and co-author of the book, The Essential Owen, to read some select excerpts.
going to take some liberties and say that protocol being established. Wish you a good evening. On behalf of myself and my co-author, Dr. Trevor Carmichael, for this, which for us was a labor of love. And I'm going to read some excerpts from a particular speech of Owen. So it's from Chaguaramas to Port of Spain, addressed by the Right Honorable Owen S. Arthur, Port of Spain, Trinidad, 4th July, 1999. I never could quite do an Owen voice, so forgive me. But here are his exact words. Distinguished Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, other colleagues, heads of government, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. In 1986, the Right Excellent Errol Barrow closed what was to be his final address to this Conference of Heads by citing the words of John Bunyan in Pilgrim's Progress. Though with much difficulty I have come hither, yet I do not repent me of the trouble I have taken. He was obviously speaking on my behalf. I thank you nonetheless for the very high honor of being able to address the highest decision-making body in our region 5 years after I was supposed to do so, but better late than never. Today, the Conference of Heads of Government returns to the land where just over a quarter of a century ago, the framework for contemporary Caribbean integration was devised. We do so on the cusp of a new century, a new millennium. It must be for us, therefore, a time of reflection about the journey from Chaguaramas to Port of Spain, but more especially, so a time for us to look forward. For our Caribbean today is, and our world of tomorrow will be remarkably different from those envisioned by the founding fathers of CARICOM just 25 years ago. The MDCs of their day are not necessarily the MDCs of today. They conceived of CARICOM in an era of inward-looking import substitution development programs in a world where access to aid, trade preferences, and concessional financing still provided an economic safety net when all else failed. They enjoyed the latitude of looking forward to a relationship with Europe and the Americas in a model of cooperation and development assistance would be invoked based on Aristotelian principles that between equals, equality, between unequals, proportionality. Indeed, it must now be clear that we can and must no longer cling to any misguided notions that our economic fortune will any longer be buttressed by the dubious largesse of former colonial powers. Whatever the special case we advance in our international negotiations, the most we can expect is a temporary respite from the inevitable. No single Caribbean society, relying only upon the strengths of its domestic market and resources, will ever be able to sustain the development which affords its citizens the prospects of an improving standard of living. What is indeed sobering is that even if we are successful in our endeavor to reconstitute the Caribbean as a single market and a single economy, that economic entity will still go into the 21st century as the smallest, most vulnerable, and most volatile economic region in the world. I offer no illusion, therefore, that the creation of a single market and economy will magically solve all of the problems of this region. However, not to create it will only make a tough situation even more difficult for us. Should there be any doubt on this matter, we need only to reflect on the fact that across the world, societies which have the resource endowment to make it on their own are coming together in their collective self-interest to form larger trading blocs and to reconstitute themselves as single market and economies. and I will skip along just in the interest of time. The building of a single Caribbean economy is integrally part of a greater requirement to create a single Caribbean society. And on the eve of a new century, we must resolve to strain our every sinew to make it succeed. In 1972, Sir Arthur Lewis spoke in these terms to the Caribbean community in his capacity as president of the CDB. To quote Sir Arthur, "Nothing here is politically easy, but to say that solutions are politically impossible is either to doubt the West Indian genius for self-government or more likely to assert some other interest must have a greater priority." I thank the government of Trinidad and Tobago for having provided us with the opportunity to say so much in an atmosphere of ambience. We, however, do not have a moment to lose. And it is my hope that 25 years hence, another generation of Caribbean leadership will not be able to proclaim that we lost the moment here in Port of Spain. I thank you.
Thank you, PVC, and I will do what you did not, which is promote unashamedly the book and invite all of you here to purchase copies of the Essential ON, and you can get a signed copy because we have the two authors right here in the audience. So thank you very much for these excerpts. We're going to move along to the next portion of our agenda tonight, which is the presentation by the family. I know that we have Sabrina with us, and we also have Mrs. Arthur and other members of the family. We have asked Ms. Leah Arthur to make some remarks on behalf of the family, after which we will do a short presentation to Mrs. Arthur, thanking the family for supporting this memorial lecture.
Distinguished guests, good evening. It is an honor to speak on behalf of the Arthur family to thank the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus for carrying on my father's legacy with this annual Distinguished Owen S. Arthur Memorial Lecture Series. More specifically, we want to extend our sincere gratitude to the team of the Shridath Ramphal Center for International Trade Law, Policy, and Services, firstly for launching this annual series last year, and for ensuring its continuity today. Special thanks must also be given to our guest speaker, Dr. Carla N. Barnett, Secretary General of the Caribbean Community Secretariat, as I am sure we are all thoroughly looking forward to her lecture this evening. At his first lecture as a professor of practice on the IMF and the Caribbean, my father thanked the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus for hosting the lecture and indulging him in his appetite to speak. He also warned Professor Udine Barato that, and I may quote, he'd humbug her to keep speaking in the future, end of quote. With this in mind, this annual lecture's call for a continuation of my father's discourse on small and vulnerable economies is confirmation that even in his death, he is still speaking as his passion for educating lives on. Two constants throughout my father's career were the aims of strengthening the bonds between Caribbean states and economic stability in Barbados and the wider region. His dedication to regionalism and economics coalesced into his drive towards the development of CARICOM, and more specifically, the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, known as the CSME. While he was never blind to the fact that the path towards regional integration would come with grave challenges, he truly believed that shifts in governance towards a focus on liberalization and an unwavering commitment from countries to initiatives that fostered cooperation between Caribbean states were the key elements required to give the region the resilience it needed to meet this target. Even beyond this, he was always on the search for new approaches towards the goal of integration. Dr. Barnett's lecture this evening, entitled The Future of CARICOM, Charting a Vision for the Region's Economic Advancement, therefore epitomizes the attitude that my father had towards the Caribbean and its development. I am sure that her words will not only reflect some of his ideas, but also provide the new paths towards economic integration that my father yearned to discover in his lifetime. Had he lived to see this lecture, there is no doubt that he and Dr. Barnett would have been the last people left in the theatre this evening, as he would have been eager to get more insight into her perspectives on the topic. My family once again wishes to thank the University of the West Indies Cayfield campus for going above and beyond to ensure that my father's work is given the praise and honor that it deserved. It is truly comforting to know that his devotion to the campus is now mirrored in the work that they have done to ensure that his legacy continues to be acknowledged and celebrated. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. I'm going to ask Mr. Java Seeley to make his way to the podium, as well as Mrs. Arthur, just to accept on behalf of the SRC and the CDB a very small token of our appreciation to the Arthur family. And continuing to support this memorial lecture by always being open to our calls and very graciously always being present and sharing your daughter and your daughters with us. So thank you very much, and your family. And Mr. Javasili, please go ahead and present the bouquet. And I'll invite Mr. Seeley to make the introduction to our distinguished speaker tonight.
The Honorable Colin Jordan, Member of Parliament for St. Peter and Minister of Labour, Social Partnership Relations and the Third Sector, Professor Clive Landis, Principal of the UWITV campus, Professor C. Justin Robinson, Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Board of Undergraduate Studies, Dr. Janice Remy, Director of the Sir Sridhar Ramphal Centre, Mrs. Julie Arthur, widow of the late Right Honourable Owen Seymour Arthur, his daughter Sabrina, Leah as well, Dr. Kayan Skeet, Trade Research Fellow, Sir Sridhar Ramphal Centre, other specially invited guests, our online audience, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Dr. Carla Barnett became the 8th Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, on the 15th of August, 2021. A respected economist, she's worked across the region for over 30 years, where she's not only led, but blazed a trail of firsts for Caribbean aspirants. As the first woman appointed Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Belize, and the first woman and youngest person appointed as Deputy Secretary General of CARICOM, she continues to inspire the next generation to set and accomplish goals beyond our imagination. Dr. Barnett was also Vice President of Operations at the Caribbean Development Bank and a consultant, providing advisory services in public sector financial management and strategic planning throughout CARICOM. She's a regional civil servant, a regional citizen, and I dare say, a regional expert. In her homeland, Belize, Dr. Barnett contested the 2015 general election and was appointed Senator and Minister of State in the Belize government from 2015 to 2020. She's an advocate for gender equality as a means of creating a more stable and equitable society and as good economic policy. She's been an active member of the Caribbean Institute of Women in Leadership, Belize chapter, a president of the Belize YWCA, and also served on the board of Haven House, a shelter for battered women. Dr. Barnett has received several awards, including the Commander of the British Empire for Distinguished Public Service. Today, she melds these rich experiences and her current worldview as the head of a leading regional institution in its 50th year. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dr. Carla Natalie Barnett to deliver the second Distinguished Owen S. Arthur Memorial Lecture under the theme, The Future of CARICOM, Charting a Vision for the Region's Economic Advancement. Dr. Barnett.
And gentlemen, permit me to say first of all that all protocols having been observed, I will only want to recognize Mrs. Julie Arthur, wife of the late Professor Right Honorable Owen Arthur, and my dear friend Dame Billy Miller, who I look up to as a senior statesperson, woman who has achieved a lot and stood as an example to a lot of women across the region. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, persons listening online, it is my pleasure and honor to deliver the second Owen S. Arthur Distinguished Lecture. We are at a moment in time when the Caribbean community, more than ever, requires the reasoned and practical vision that Owen Arthur shared with us during his journey as a statesman, a regionalist, academic, and professional economist. The late Right Honorable Owen Arthur was strong in his belief, fed both from the heart and from the head, that the fight for independence in the Caribbean compelled on all of us, and I quote, an obligation to build societies which rest on the strong and sound capital of a secure sense of identity, kinship, community, and shared values, and is supported by strong and viable economies that are capable of progressively meeting the material needs of the people, all within the context of the attainment of social justice for all. This is the essence of sustainable development. Owen Arthur was of the view that the Caribbean integration, and especially the CARICOM single market and economy, was an essential driver of regional economic growth, social mobility, prosperity, and sustainable development. He believed that integration strengthens the resilience of our region and reinforces our capacity to withstand the shocks and manage the risks emanating from the global economy, and provides a basis for engaging on the international stage where our combined impact would be greater than the sum of our individual efforts. I had the privilege of serving as Deputy Secretary General at the CARICOM Secretariat with Sir Edwin Carrington at the time that the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas was being finalized and the heads of government established the quasi-cabinet. Owen Arthur took on the responsibility of leading the work to establish the CSME with a passion that, it could be argued, offered new decisive approaches that perhaps all were not ready to consider. But he pushed, he persisted, he argued, and yes, he even scolded as the community commenced to put in place the critical elements of the CSME, but not as urgently as he would have liked to see it take place. I remember a conversation with him in the corridors of a CARICOM meeting, about the need for well thought out professional advice as we move forward. He said to me something like this: I know I am a trained economist, but it is that very training that makes me seek advice from other economists whenever I have a policy decision to make. I cannot advise myself. I cannot know everything, but my training allows me to make informed judgments on whether the advice being given is well-grounded or is just. And those of you who knew and engaged with the Right Honorable Owen Arthur can take an educated guess at his choice words. Owen Arthur's outstanding contribution to regional integration, his leadership and sage advice played no small part in shaping the CARICOM that is now increasingly being seen as having a vital role in our region's efforts to deal with unprecedented shocks that demand a collective response. Drawing on his legacy, I have subtitled my lecture, Making the CARICOM Single Market and Economy a Lived Reality Towards Building Sustainable Economic Development and Resilience. I believe, like Owen Arthur did, that our community, this grouping of small sovereign states, with the will and contribution of all its peoples, has the capacity to create our own transformation into resilient, competitive economies and societies where all can prosper. We have a solid foundation in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which remains our roadmap for regional integration. We have the Charter of Civil Society, which represents shared values, operational principles on which CARICOM stands as individual sovereign member states and as a region. While our implementation of the CSME has not kept pace with the vision of the architects of the treaty, I am convinced that a momentum is building towards implementing key outstanding commitments arising from the revised treaty and to shape a 21st century agenda that focuses on critical issues that must be addressed in order to deliver a sustainable future for our region and our people. In 2004, Owen Arthur made the point that, and I quote, "The CSME is a work in progress. Regional decision-making must be complemented with national action, given that CARICOM is a union of sovereign nations. The revised treaty is a flexible instrument which allows for the redesign of elements whilst retaining the basic foundation principles." In that same speech, he also pointed out that, and I quote, "It is important to make clear that the CSME will never appear in any one place or time as a finished or finite entity with a grand finale, complete with fireworks. Rather, it will evolve. This was never intended to suggest that the implementation of the CSME should be slow. Owen Arthur would be and was impatient of the delays and deferrals that too often characterized the way we did business and do business. The good news is that he would not be alone. Our heads of government in their recent meetings have emphasized the need for us to speed up our implementation and strengthen collaborative efforts to reinforce our resilience as our region faces unprecedented shocks and threats. The CSME will be no fifth wheel to the coach, as Owen is known to have said many times. Instead, it must be part of our lived reality, integral to production processes, employment generation, social stability, and wealth generation in the community. Over the last 2.5 years since the declaration of the COVID-19 pandemic, CARICOM has functioned as a highly collaborative mechanism with our regional institutions working together and with national agencies to monitor the evolution of the pandemic, coordinate information sharing among ourselves and the international and bilateral organizations. We coordinated access to vaccines through bilateral and international programs, and we shared vaccine among ourselves in a context in which we had neither the resources nor the market size to demand attention. At the national levels, we did what we could with the resources available to boost social safety nets to ensure that in the context of the virtual shutdown of tourism, the main source of economic activity for many, some help could be offered to the unemployed. But the costs imposed by the COVID pandemic and related shocks have been significant and threaten to erode the development gains that we have achieved within our community. More than that, the very visible threats to our food security, real difficulties in accessing medical supplies, and stumbling blocks to accessing development financing at the scale and the scope needed to address our vulnerability to external shocks, and external shocks by definition are those shocks that are not of our own making. This has emphasized the need to work more effectively together within the community and demonstrated the positive results of doing so. Hence, our accelerated work on regional agricultural production, industrial policy, and strengthened South-South collaboration. Our recent experience has reminded us that economic integration, as embodied in the vision for the CSME, is the core of CARICOM's integration process, against which the other pillars, foreign policy coordination, human and social development, and security coordination, are all aligned. Indeed, it would appear that the vital importance of regional integration is also being increasingly recognized by the international financial institutions and our bilateral partners, who acknowledge that given our small size and the prevailing global landscape, deepening economic integration and collaboration is important to future development. A recent World Bank report entitled 360 Degrees Resilience has acknowledged, for example, and I quote, the good functioning of regional coordination and the social protection programs to respond to crises. Let us look at some of the challenges and, conversely, the opportunities for progress confronting CARICOM states. First, the growth challenge. Starting from first principles, that development requires growth. The difficulties of achieving and maintaining stable growth over the last 40 years or so are clearly visible. The empirical evidence shows that between 1970 to 1990, CARICOM states as a group achieved average growth rates that were comparable with other developing regions. However, since 1990, the region has grown more slowly and has lagged behind the annual average growth rate in Latin America by about 0.5%. This low growth performance has been associated with high public debt burden accompanied by and related to a limited fiscal space, and the skewing of public expenditures away from infrastructural and social development and towards a growing wage bill. In all this, the dynamism of the private sector has also lagged, and too often with a greater focus on commerce based on imports rather than production based on local inputs, even in tourism, which has a historically high import content. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated our growth challenges, and the impact has been much worse because of the inherent structural vulnerabilities that we know all so well. Limited economic diversification reflected in the narrow economic base, high structural unemployment, and dependence on foreign capital and international trade for both consumption and production. With the exception of Guyana, CARICOM member states all experienced GDP losses in 2020, which range from -3% to a high of -20% and average around 13% across the community. This exceeded global GDP losses of -3.1% as well as the -7% realized by Latin America and the Caribbean as a group. While global growth averaged 6% in 2021, CARICOM member states, excluding Guyana, recorded an average growth rate of around 3%, with a few member states experiencing further GDP losses of 1.8 to -3, of -1.8% to -3%, as growth in global tourism continued to lag. However, member states are expected to record stronger growth in 2022, ranging from the doubling of Guyana's growth rate to over 40%, to 6% on average for the tourism-dependent economies, and around 4% in the other commodity-dependent economies. But continued growth will be needed in the short to medium term to compensate for the GDP losses that were recorded since 2019-2020, and to establish a platform for sustainable development and strengthen resilience beyond the medium term. To overcome the growth challenge, it is arguable that small states like those in CARICOM require a different policy agenda than that available to larger countries. Indeed, one recommendation has been that small CARICOM states should embrace their openness and seek opportunities for export diversification and the attraction of foreign direct investment inflows. I recall Owen Arthur emphasizing the importance of building new productive capacity when he insisted, and I quote, "For the Caribbean to attain and stay on a viable path to growth and development, a concerted effort has to be made to transform its economies from being trade preference-dependent economies, which they have been traditionally, and debt-propelled economies, which they have recently become, to being investment-driven economies marked by a very high component of private foreign capital, and eventually genuine export-propelled economies." Complementary to embracing our openness is the deepening of regional integration as a solution to the supply constraints and structural rigidities associated with small size, thereby providing a larger platform for enhancing economic competitiveness and prosperity. These policy implications are all embodied in the framework for the CARICOM single market and economy. Second, there is the challenge of our overwhelming and growing susceptibility to the impact of climate change. We see it in the effects of tropical storms, rising sea levels, drought, and salination of freshwater sources such as our aquifers. We see it in its impact on agricultural production, public infrastructure, housing, and in the resultant increase in the costs of replacing roads and bridges and homes to meet the new standards and codes that are required by climate change. We have had hurricanes result in economic damage estimated in multiples of annual GDP. For example, Dominica endured a 220% GDP loss from Hurricane Maria, just 2 years after a 90% GDP loss from Tropical Storm Erika. Dominica's experience, along with the devastation wreaked by Hurricanes Irma, Maria, Dorian, and Ivan, is a graphic reminder that the effects of climate change will worsen as the average rise in global temperature continues to accelerate towards a threshold of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, thereby threatening our very existence. Bearing in mind that even at that level, it is thought that climate impacts will go beyond the tolerable limit for humans and nature. A 1.5 degrees world is not the optimistic view. It is the bare minimum that we require. I am also reminded that the debt burden carried by our member states stems heavily from disaster recovery. The vicious cycle is one in which climate action causes regular devastation, necessitating regular rebuilding, which requires funding that could only be acquired through borrowing at high rates because many CARICOM member states do not qualify for concessional funding. This is due to a simple arithmetical calculation used by the multilateral institutions, GNI per capita, which does not take vulnerability into account. This community is therefore at the forefront of the call for a just metric, which takes account of our vulnerabilities and susceptibilities in order to broaden access to concessional financing. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in encouraging countries to ramp up the implementation of their climate mitigation strategies, acknowledged that economic benefits increase and conversely adaptation costs decrease with the stringency of mitigation. They, however, advise that the mitigation potential of SIDS, in our case, small island and low-lying coastal development states, relative to their contributions to global greenhouse gas emissions, remain limited while they are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of human-induced climate change. Financing for adaptation and loss and damage associated with human-induced climate change are therefore imperatives for SIDS. But the United Nations recently stated in a report on accessing climate finance that SIDS, and I quote, are being disproportionately and increasingly impacted by the impacts of climate change, while their special circumstances make them extremely vulnerable to other external shocks, including the COVID-19 pandemic. SIDS urgently need access to external financial support and capacity to aid their pandemic recovery, and to build resilience between the social, economic, and natural systems on which they depend. However, the current climate and development finance architecture is exceedingly complex and unequipped to operate efficiently, fairly, and at the scale and speed needed to meet SIDS needs. This conclusion was drawn against the background of the increasing recognition of the multifaceted nature of the vulnerability of SIDS as encompassing economic, environmental, physical, and social factors. Climate change is therefore increasing the strength of natural disasters, thereby amplifying the debilitating consequences of our structural rigidities, resulting in greater economic contraction, increasing inflation levels, fiscal and current account imbalances, and growing public debt. Our very survival is dependent on our capacity to undertake adaptation initiatives to build economic and climate resilience. In the context of inadequate access to affordable climate finance, the situation is quite frightening. It is even more frightening when we consider that beyond our limits of adaptation lie the permanent loss and damage of our countries. The discussion about who pays for loss and damage, or even that a loss and damage financing facility is necessary, has had little uptake in a situation where we are not the source of, but bear the greater burden of the impact of climate change. We are therefore seeking to mitigate, adapt to, and respond to loss and damage in a less than propitious environment. At the bilateral level, advanced countries are preoccupied with their own recovery programs, and very few are meeting their pledge of 0.7% of GNI in official development assistance to developing countries. Neither have they provided much towards their commitment to provide US $100 billion in new contributions to climate finance. It also appears that the contributions that are being identified as climate finance have been reallocated from within existing ODA budgets, and therefore there has been little additionality. At the multilateral level, under the current rules for access, there is simply not sufficient affordable development and climate finance available to countries classified as middle or high income. Accordingly, many CARICOM states will not be able to access the recently established IMF Resilience and Sustainability Trust Fund. Third challenge, there is the challenge of navigating and managing the multiple and amplifying risks emanating from the global environment. The Russia-Ukraine war, along with the stress of COVID-19 economic recovery, have compounded the prevailing economic risks and uncertainty confronting small states. These risks include the burden of sharply rising inflation, supply chain disruptions, food insecurity, fragmentation of trade, investment, and financial networks, as well as cybersecurity risks. Moreover, heightened regulatory action on the money laundering, terrorism financing, and global taxation landscapes continue to present significant challenges to CARICOM states. These challenges cannot be met by countries acting alone. They demand, and they are receiving, collective action, collective attention from our community. How do we address the challenges confronting member states through the CSME construct? Adapting the CARICOM integration framework to take account of rapidly changing national, regional, and global imperatives requires visionary leadership, something our region has never had in short supply. Indeed, it was the visionary leadership of well-known integration stalwarts in whose footsteps Owen Arthur trod comfortably that led to CARIFTA, CARICOM, and the CSME. Our regional integration effort, despite setbacks, has been a model that other regions have sought to emulate. We should not lose sight of the strides that the region has made towards forging a common market, a common identity, a single economic space, and shared values. However, these achievements give no cause for complacency because there is a lot of work to do. The adoption in 2001 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas incorporating the CSME was undoubtedly a bold and unprecedented step forward in deepening our regional integration process. Much has been said about the implementation deficit in CARICOM, and that the success of the CSME has been less than overwhelming. This discussion often ignores what has been achieved and does not consider the challenges inherent in attempting to implement aspects of the CSME. I repeat the words of Owen Arthur. The CSME is a work in progress. Regional decision-making must be complemented with national action, given that CARICOM is a union of sovereign nations. This, I believe, is where we need to focus our attention in order to accelerate implementation. In the CARICOM construct, decisions taken at the regional level are implemented at the national level through laws and regulations that incorporate regional decisions to enable national institutions to implement regional agreements. There is no regional superstructure to do this, and there is not likely to be, given that at this time, CARICOM is a union of sovereign nations. CARICOM heads of government have reiterated from time to time their commitment to the implementation of the CSME as the platform for growth, development, and resilience building in the Caribbean community. There is a recognition that the efficacy of the regional decision-making process resides in agreed measures being directly supportive of national policymaking and vice versa. There is recognition that there may be need to design or redesign regional initiatives as prevailing circumstances change. There is also recognition that regional integration cannot continue to move only when all are ready to move, a long-standing practice which ensured that the implementation process moves at the pace of the slowest. At their meeting in March of this year, CARICOM heads of government agreed to the adoption of a protocol on enhanced cooperation, which makes provision for a subgroup of countries that are ready to move ahead to implement regional decisions at a faster pace, to do so with other countries following when they are able. This points to the determination to confront the challenge of implementation by carrying out reforms in the way the community conducts its affairs. CARICOM heads of government also recognize the importance of reviewing and improving the systems of governance of the community, which are grounded in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, with a view to strengthening the implementation of decisions. Following the significant decision on enhanced cooperation taken in March, heads of government at their regular meeting in July made several other decisions regarding the governance arrangements. Heads agreed to establish a calendar of 6 meetings of the Conference of Heads annually, with regular meetings being held in person in February and March as per normal, and 4 virtual intersessional meetings being held during the year. This will include a retreat at the February meetings where heads can address community matters in a more informal setting with a view to advancing agreement on critical issues which may be on hand. This upcoming move to a schedule of 6 meetings recognizes that heads have already been holding a number of special meetings that arise during the year on issues that come up. We expect that formalizing these additional meetings will allow agendas for meetings to be rationalized and at the same time facilitate greater discussion of critical issues. Those who are familiar with CARICOM heads meetings are aware that agendas have grown to near unmanageable lengths over the years. We are sorting that out. Heads have also agreed that the Community Council, the second highest organ of the community, should also strengthen its functioning in accordance with its responsibilities as set out in the revised treaty. The Community Council has been given the mandate, in addition, to oversee the development of further proposals for strengthening community governance. And the Intergovernmental Task Force on Treaty Revision will be reestablished at the appropriate time, given the need to review and update the revised treaty to incorporate decisions already taken by the conference, as well as any new decisions that flow from the ongoing work to be done on strengthening community governance. There is a lot of work to be done. And rather than depend almost solely on external consultants funded by international development partners, the Secretariat proposed, and it has been agreed, that we establish regional expert groups from time to time to provide structured technical advice to the community in the development of policy and in implementation efforts. Access to a broader range of expertise, including through collaboration with the regional universities, research bodies, regional experts resident in the region or in the diaspora, etc., can provide additional expertise to enrich the deliberations of and recommendations coming from the Secretariat and from other community bodies. The decisions taken so far on the community governance arrangements, and this is a work in progress, indicate that heads of government are indeed seized of the moment, convinced of the necessity to work together to address and overcome the challenges we confront. I am convinced that the demonstration effects from actions taken by some member states under the Enhanced Cooperation Protocol, together with the move to strengthen governance processes, will catalyze a more focused and comprehensive rollout of community decisions and measures, including the CSME program, which will support the movement of CARICOM member states onto a path of more inclusive growth, sustained economic development, and resilience. The CSME blueprint, as outlined in the revised treaty, envisages a broad-based free movement of persons, goods, and capital as the foundation for the single market infrastructure, and an ambitious macroeconomic and sectoral policy coordination program as the foundation for the single economy. The free movement process has resulted in the removal of 450 existing restrictions, and with few exceptions, goods can move across the region free of duty. The operation of our common external tariff is governed by a clear set of rules, and these, together with the rules of origin regime, are at an advanced stage of review to update them for the 21st century trading environment. However, the CARICOM single market alone cannot foster the economic transformation required to secure sustainable development and build resilience in CARICOM member states. Regional economic transformation would also require the realization of the objectives of macroeconomic and sectoral policy coordination as envisaged in Chapter 4 of the revised treaty. In that regard, Owen Arthur had argued that, and I quote, "This single economy will be an ongoing effort for which there cannot be a fixed deadline." His advice in 2004, and reiterated on several occasions since, is still relevant today. It is therefore important, as he said, it is therefore important that while we seek to make haste as quickly as possible, we do not set ourselves impossible deadlines by which to accomplish what can only be described as a major exercise in economic re-engineering, repositioning, and ultimately economic fusion in the region. And that is the task ahead. The re-engineering and repositioning of CARICOM economies and their ultimate fusion into a dynamic, competitive economic space. Owen Arthur believed we have the capacity to do this. I believe so too, notwithstanding the fact that as a community of sovereign states, we have chosen the most difficult route to integration, whereby each member state retains exclusive powers for national implementation of decisions made at the regional level. As Owen once cautioned, it will be difficult to achieve, but it will be worth pursuing. To achieve it, we have to think and act more strategically than has been the case in the history of the Caribbean. For at the end of the day, Whether it is developing a national or a regional economy, success depends on mastering those key few strategic things that simply make the difference. End of quote. It is with this caution in mind that the community's macroeconomic policy coordination agenda and the further development of the agricultural, industrial, and services sectors have remained as key priorities for the community. As we grapple with the imperatives of mobilizing development and climate finance, along with private financing to drive the growth process, financial sector development and investment attraction have become even greater priorities for CARICOM member states. Additionally, increased levels of protectionism, which characterized upheavals in the multilateral trading framework over the last decade, became even more evident following the emergence of COVID-19. Access to supplies of basic needs such as food, medicine, and other medical supplies was severely compromised as our traditional trading partners adopted restrictive measures, including complete bans on exports of some of these essential products. Disruptions in transportation networks and associated increases in costs have contributed to inflationary pressures that threaten to further destabilize already vulnerable economies. These experiences have given impetus to sectoral policy in the community, beginning with the agricultural sector. CARICOM member states are actively implementing the Agri-Food System strategy in order to reduce reliance on extra-regional imports of food, enhance production and trade of regional agricultural products, and provide greater access to a supply of nutritious foods. The effort to reduce the community's dependence on food imports and thereby reduce the $6 billion annual food import bill has been actively led by the President of Guyana, who has responsibility for agriculture in the CARICOM quasi-cabinet. In March 2022, the President of Suriname assumed responsibility for industrial policy and is actively organizing delivery on a regional industrial policy and strategy. Both agriculture and industrial policies have been and are being developed with the input of regional stakeholders in the private sector and with the support of other regional and international organizations working in those sectors. If the two recent fora on agriculture held in Guyana and then in Trinidad and Tobago are indicative of the passion and commitment to achieve the objectives of food and nutrition security, as well as stimulating economic growth and development, I have no doubt that the community is on the right trajectory. With regard to free movement of persons, good progress has been made with the movement of service providers, and with the decisions taken in July 2022, we now have the basis for full implementation of the 12 categories, including agricultural workers, for which agreement has been reached. I am one who feels that this is not enough, and I am looking forward to the region making good progress towards full free movement soon. I believe the sentiment is moving in this direction. Reliable, cost-effective, safe, and secure air and maritime transportation are critical, not only to the development of the regional economy, but to the strengthening of the sense of community. There are promising discussions taking place with regard to both air and maritime transportation. But for the immediate future, it is a challenge that remains to be resolved. The community's macroeconomic policy coordination work program also comprises initiatives related to the modernization of the regional financial sector, including capital market development and integration, fiscal policy, including tax administration, corporation, and investment policy coordination and harmonization. Given the priority of mobilizing regional resources, along with external resources for economic recovery and transformation of member states, the development of the regional securities market and credit reporting framework, as well as the design of the community as a single investment space, have now been prioritized for regional action. Additionally, the heightened interest in contactless payments and the electronic delivery of financial services has precipitated the prioritization of the design of a regional legal and regulatory framework to protect the rights of financial services consumers. Just last year, CARICOM Ministers of Finance approved community policies on credit reporting and deposit insurance. The community policy on credit reporting establishes a roadmap for transition to a modern regulatory framework for domestic credit reporting systems and the cross-border sharing of credit information. This is particularly important for those community nationals who need to establish their creditworthiness as they move to live and work in different member states. CARICOM Ministers of Finance are also considering a policy for the development and regulation of the regional securities market as a step towards creating an integrated capital market. And those of us who have been operating in the financial system for years know that this is a long-standing goal of the community even before the adoption of the revised treaty. The ongoing work on community investment policy, CARICOM Investment Code and Investment Incentives Regime will delineate the community as a common investment space governed by similar rules and with opportunities for enhanced production and productivity. Alongside the initiatives to modernize and further develop the CARICOM financial sector and the common investment space is the reality of the evolving global tax governance agenda and financial regulatory architecture. The intra-CARICOM double taxation agreement, which predated the revised treaty, has been deemed to be non-compliant with member states' commitments in respect to the global tax governance agenda, which now emphasizes exchange of tax information and tax reform to prevent evasion and avoidance, especially given the challenges emanating from the digitalization of the global economy. We therefore have to review our double taxation treaty as well as prepare for the adoption of new rules on corporation tax to protect our tax bases. Addressing this particular challenge requires not only specialized technical services, but also vigilance and a concerted program of advocacy to take into account the special needs of small states in the design of rules for corporation tax systems being spearheaded by the Organization for Cooperation and Economic Development. As we put our house in order and take bold, even disruptive steps to pursue the integration goals that will foster growth and development, we must seize the moment to engage externally with the dynamism that is now driving the internal agenda. We must adapt our external trade and economic strategy to embrace new opportunities in South-South cooperation. We must look for partnerships that embrace the future, building on those that have been long established. It is in this context that I see the recent Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum as a timely and promising start to a new stage in our relationship with Africa, a region with which our history is intertwined. There is strong potential for growth and investment through mutually beneficial trade and economic cooperation with Africa, where the market in the African continental free trade area is projected to reach $6.7 trillion US dollars in value by 2035. The first African Caribbean Expo, which was held last week, which I believe is something that the Right Honorable Owen Arthur would have been exceedingly proud to support, provided an excellent opportunity for business-to-business engagement, which can result in enhanced trade in goods and services between the developing countries of the Caribbean and the developing countries of Africa. In all this, there is the challenge to embrace a digital strategy that opens the region more fully to the opportunities presented by the rapid technological advances that are transforming our societies and our economies. While we deal with long-standing plans and the old challenges that remain relevant and important, we must make haste to identify and address the newer issues that are already shaping the future of our economies and our societies. Finally, and perhaps most critically, we must recognize that true social and economic development in the rules-based framework of our community can best be achieved by anchoring our efforts in the rights-based foundation elaborated in the CARICOM Charter of Civil Society. As we accelerate the push for growth, We must do so with inclusiveness, fairness, and respect for the right and dignity of all CARICOM citizens at all times and without exception. As an economist who saw economics as a social science, who saw that economics as a social science is but one way of looking at a society, Owen Arthur understood that sustainable nation building in small, vulnerable states required leadership that, in his words, placed a premium on the development and enhancement of the social capital. And so, Owen Arthur was one of the foremost proponents of the Charter of Civil Society for the Caribbean Community that was adopted in 1997 and expressed the commitments of our member states to press freedom, a fair and open democratic process, effective functioning of the parliamentary system, morality in public affairs, respect for fundamental civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, the rights of women and children, respect for the religious diversity, and greater accountability and transparency in government. The Charter of Civil Society was clearly an aspirational precedent for the Sustainable Development Goals. Owen Arthur, up to the time of his passing, consistently advocated for a more visible CARICOM embrace of the Charter of Civil Society to accelerate sustainable development in our region. I have tried to give a broad overview of how the challenges and opportunities, risks confronting CARICOM member states at this critical juncture are related to the roadmap for an effectively functioning CSME. As I end, I would like to address an issue that Owen Arthur had flagged repeatedly, both as a head of government with responsibility for the CSME and as an academic. That is our inability to effectively communicate and secure broad-based buy-in for the initiatives comprising the work program for implementing the CSME. More particularly, we have not adequately articulated our successes as a regional integration movement in a manner which motivates the demand by ordinary citizens of the community for continued national implementation of regional actions. When I assumed the office of CARICOM Secretary General just over a year ago, I acknowledged the sense of community in the people of the region, which manifests itself in both our brightest and our darkest days. We celebrate together our successes in sport and our cultural icons, and we do all we can to help each other when disasters strike. For me, this is a source of strength to build on through the practice of that inclusiveness expressed in the Charter of Civil Society that calls for the involvement of community stakeholders in all sectors in learning about and contributing to the work of the community. This is what we are setting out to do at the Secretariat of the Community as we seek to build a truly integrated, inclusive, and resilient community that is driven by knowledge, excellence, innovation, and productivity, where every citizen is secure with guaranteed human rights and social justice, and contributes to and shares in its economic, social, and cultural prosperity, a community which is a unified and competitive one in the global arena. There is a lot of work to do together to make the CARICOM, including the CSME, a lived reality for all in the Caribbean community. And as Owen Arthur would say around the CARICOM table, when the discussion was done and the decision was taken, he would often say, "Let it be done." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barnett. That took us through every aspect conceivable of the CSME work program. I hadn't remembered or known the contribution that PM made towards the advancement of the Charter of Civil Society, and speaking also about implementation issues and the core economic challenges facing the CSME, and also your drive and your direction in trying to overcome some of these has given us much food for thought. But the task is not to me to probe some of your thoughts and thinking on the matter. At this point, I'm going to invite Senator Dr. Christina Hines, the head of Government Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology, to lead us in this segment of the program, the question and answer segment. And I've been asked by the team here, for anyone who has questions, to go to the back of the room where there are some open mics, and please keep your face mask on, just for in compliance with the protocols. And online, I imagine there are also avenues for posing questions, which will be fed to the question and answer moderator. So Dr. Hines, Senator Hines, please advance to the podium.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to be here, and I really enjoyed and took extensive notes on that talk. Thank you, Dr. Barnett. We will be taking questions as well from our online audiences via UWITV as well as Facebook. I will be receiving some of those as they come. So I would like to ask, before I jump right in, are there any questions from the floor? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I will go straight to mine. Okay. My first question, and I really do thank you for such an extensive discussion of CARICOM, an emphasis on the CSME in particular. You spoke about some of the challenges of implementation over the years. But I note that the decision to create the CSME was one that was taken in 1989. We had the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas in 2001. And since there has been such a lag, as you noted, in no small part due to issues with national implementation, how truly applicable is the CSME as created and as, I guess, conceptualized at the time to the current world in which we live, considering a lot of the advances that you've spoken to us about, advances in technology, and we can also talk about some of the occurrences such as the pandemic, but even prior to the pandemic, other changes that we have seen in the world during the course of the 21st century.
You're asking me how relevant it is today.
The implementation. So are we looking to implement something that perhaps it does not fully make sense to implement because we have moved ahead?
Well, let me put it this way, and as Owen Arthur himself said, there is a built-in flexibility in the way the treaty was put together, the revised treaty. The issues that we are treating with have evolved, and as we work through the implementation process, we take into account the reality that's on the ground. We are not implementing today a design from 1989 and then agreed. No, that's not what we're implementing. What the treaty put forward was a series of things that we had to work on together. And so it is a process of working through these things. And the reality is that where we are right now, the priority matters that we are treating with, agriculture and food production, industrial policy, development of the financial sector, those are the priorities now, and they are being addressed not on the basis of information or a design from then. They are being addressed to resolve the issues that we face today.
Okay. Thank you. I would also like for persons who are watching online to know that in addition to the UWITV Facebook page and uwitv.org, we will be accepting questions from the CDB's Facebook page and CARICOM's Facebook page. And when these come in, I will ask them. I have one question, and that question is about the role of youth in the advancement of CARICOM, CSME, as well as implementation.
Absolutely essential. I feel so personally. I made it my business to ensure that my very first engagement was with the youth, the group of CARICOM young ambassadors. I believe that as the older folk, it is our responsibility and our duty to ensure that we include the younger people for whom we are supposed to be building this society. So, young people are absolutely essential. We have to be sure that their views are taken into account in charting the priorities, and we have to ensure that we are seeking to solve the problems that they are faced with. Right now, for example, the school year has started, and we're seeing the young people go back to school for the first time. They are coming out of a situation that has been really difficult over the last 2 to 3 years, and we have to take that into account. It is really very important for us to engage with, for us to listen, for us to respond, and for us to create a society that not only respects, but provides context within young people can make their contributions.
On that note, can you tell us a bit about, and this connects to some of the later points you made in your talk, a bit about how we will, or CARICOM will, engage people so that they understand the work of CARICOM, the potential benefits, and so that we can indeed engage youth to get their feedback and to get them on board with regionalism?
That's an interesting question. There are several things we're attempting to do, and one of my staff, who is our communications person here in Barbados, in our office here, is present. We're doing several things. One is to re-engage more frequently, more effectively with the media, because we have not been doing a lot of that over the last several years. We are also seeking to change the way we communicate, or broaden the way we communicate, or simply incorporate the new ways of communicating, particularly with young people. So we haven't begun to do this yet, but we are putting in place the basis on which we can do this. We are seeking to incorporate more fully and more properly digital means of communication, because we haven't been doing that so effectively in the past, and we want to do that. We also want, as a matter of programming our work for as we move ahead, to ensure that we communicate with all of our stakeholders. The Charter of Civil Society that I reference really does require us to be incorporating in our communication universe not only the regular media, not only the political, technical persons who come to our meetings, but the stakeholders on the ground, our non-government organizations, our young people, a full range of community stakeholders. So one of the things that we want to be able to do is to arrange opportunities for information to move back and forth, but also to put out better, clearer, more frequent communications products that reaches all stakeholders.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Yes.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your remarks. I was just interested in finding out if regional transportation, air and sea, you glossed over it a little bit, and I suspect that was because of the breadth of of information you were trying to get through in a short space of time. Is regional transportation important for CARICOM, and what is being done to, you mentioned that there were meetings going on about regional transportation, air and sea, but I didn't get a sense that from your presentation that this is something that's going to happen soon.
It is something that is happening quite soon. A couple of things have happened. There's a bit of work that we've asked CDB to do, which is to help us map out some of what is currently on the ground and what the gaps are that need to be filled. There are active conversations going on about establishing, in terms of maritime transportation, ferry services that, beginning with the Southern Caribbean, to move not only people but agricultural commodities. That is a conversation that's taking place, that we're looking to see the proposals come forward pretty soon. And there are conversations about regional air transportation. We are in a situation in the region where, as a result of the shutdowns in tourism, the closures of airports, the airline companies laying off people globally, travel within the region is extremely complicated, extremely scarce, and extremely expensive. So that the imperative of solving that is right upon us, and there are conversations taking place as well around that at this time. I can't give details about it because I am not around the table. But beyond that, the expectation is that we should be seeing in the near future some additionalities in terms of air and in terms of maritime transportation solutions coming on stream.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
Hi, good night, Dr. Bartlett. My question is, when we speak about economic advancement, how, as we in the region, looking at capitalizing on the billion-dollar industry of sports? Sorry. Okay, hear me better now? Okay, and good night to the panelists. When we speak about economic advancement, how are we in the region looking at capitalizing on the million-dollar industry of sports and sports tourism? And they're saying this in the backdrop of, we have something here in the region which most of the first world countries don't have, which is year-round sunshine. You know, as a former sports person, I know how it is for teams wanting to train in, you know, have the opportunity to train year-round. So is this something that we're looking at?
Let me put it this way. These are initiatives that some countries are ahead of others in considering and in developing. We have tended in the past to focus on cricket in terms of tourism. I'm not sure that's a place to hang it right now. Reality is reality. But there is an opportunity there, and I know that there are member states developing facilities, developing plans in which they can encourage international athletes to come into the region, to develop training programs in the region. But that's not something that is happening at the CARICOM level at this stage. That is something that would be happening at the member state level at this stage. And those member states who have developed facilities so far that are at the world-class level, because it's the world-class level facilities that we're talking about, are those that would be ahead of the game. It is extremely expensive to develop these facilities, and therefore it is not something that we would see spread across the region, but it would be something that countries can seek to specialize in order to develop that facility. But in terms of sports tourism, attracting to games here and events here, that's, I don't know. The experience of cricket is a difficult one to follow.
Have a follow-up.
That's okay. Yeah.
I'm saying this in the backdrop because only recently I've reached out, because I actually work at the National Sports Council here in Barbados, yeah? And I've actually reached out to the international body that deals with volleyball. And they are very keen in hosting their Olympic qualifiers for 2023, 2024 here in Barbados. And all it was literally me sending an email and we having the beaches here. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, cricket might not be the best example at this point in time for us to look at, but there are a lot of other sports in the world, that's really taking off that we could capitalize on and really push.
I agree with you 100%. Our experience has really in the past been limited to that. But what you just explained is precisely what I'm saying. At the member state level, we know that activities are taking place. I know there's also an increasing inactivity within different sports around the region. So we may have cyclists moving around the region, going to different places. We may have swimmers doing it as well, but it's not as organized. And so there's great potential there to be developed, and particularly for those member states that already have facilities, as I say, that are world-class facilities, that they would have the strategic advantage to pursue that at the member state level.
Thank you for that. I really have quite an interest in that question as well, thinking about, as a former national athlete myself, but in terms of the development of sports in the individual CARICOM states, how really important it would be to have greater access to travel and the ability for teams to compete with each other so that then when they get to the world stage, we really can be even more world-class than we already are. So
well, we are world-class, you know. We punch above our weight in sport for our total population, and I always remind people of that, because sometimes we think it's really 5 or 6 athletes in one country. No, it's more than that, but it's out of a relatively small population, and a population that does not, by definition, have access to the best training and facilities every place. So we're punching above our weight in sport. For me, it suggests that that is something we need to incorporate more, not only in the formal education system, but at the community level system, so that if we can get our young people involved in sport younger in their communities by putting reasonable facilities in the communities for them, it brings out that talent early and it helps us to identify. So that's my push for the education systems and for the community development systems to roll out more of those, we don't have we may not need to do the world-class facility in every single community, let's put it like that. But we do need to put acceptable level facilities for young people to develop their capabilities at a younger age so we can spot the talent earlier.
Well, we have quite a number of questions now rolling in from our online viewership, and I know we have another one from the floor. I'd just like to take one from online before we go to our audience member. This person has a question about CARICOM's policy on public data ownership. And the person wants to know, I guess, first of all, do we have a policy at the level of CARICOM? And where are Caribbean citizens' public data located? Who owns it? Who protects it?
In each of our individual member states, we have laws that establish the collection, collation, publication of data. And each of our countries' laws protects private individuals' personal information, so that ought to be respected at each individual member states' data collection systems, whether it's the statistical offices, the central banks, wherever. So there isn't a CARICOM policy. There is the set of laws across the region, and all of our member states are members of the various international groups that are responsible for establishing what the metadata requirements are for each. So our data is comparable as we collect them. Our data is collated, unfortunately, not necessarily within the region as a matter of norm, but the systems are there. There's an ongoing discussion, if I may, Jean. There's an ongoing discussion that we've been having, CARICOM, CDB, perhaps a few others, about creating a space, a system, online access, a hub of some kind, where we can begin to put all CARICOM data in one place so it's easier to find. Because it's a little bit, I don't want to use, that would be an Arthur word. It's a little bit difficult when we're trying to access regional information and then we have to go to the database for the IMF or the World Bank or the IDB rather than being able to access all our data systems in one place within our region. So that's a project that we're trying to sort through how we can make that data better available, because at the end of the day, often the quality of decision making rests on the quality of the information that goes into data, into the decision making process. And so for us, it's really very important for us to do that. So the data itself, as it's collected in each member state, to the extent that the data is all following the international practice and protected by the national laws, the data should be fine. Accessing the data is a problem that needs to be solved.
Okay. And I know that concerns about protection of data are very serious, especially in these times when people see hacking and all kinds of security breaches occur. So if it is being maintained at the regional level, I understand the questioner's
You're talking about in the digital age.
Yes.
Where individual persons' personal information can be hacked.
Yes.
Cybersecurity is absolutely essential. That's one of the things that our security systems people, we coordinate our security infrastructure through CARICOM impacts and through the regional security system and all of that. That's one of the things that's on their agenda as priority, because the more we become users of the digital processes in the absence of proper security systems, whether they are on our own computers, on our phones or whatever, yes, risks increase. And so, you know, we have to be mindful of all of that. There is work that is on the way in our digital strategy that's being rolled out, that's providing a certain level of education for persons, that's providing a certain degree of care and attention to the need for being sure that we are treading that path as safely and as securely as possible.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions from the floor.
In relation to the data being available for the Caribbean region, because sometimes it is a bit of a data lacuna in the Caribbean, the leading data expert in the University of the West Indies is Professor Hambleton, and he's been liaising with CARICOM and with the IADB, and last week he actually did receive the necessary funding. So that's something that the University of the West Indies is going to be putting forward with CARICOM to have this thing called Carib data. And Professor Hambleton's track record is really second to none as the most highly published researcher in our university. So that's just an update on that very necessary undertaking. I have a question which relates to just, from the view of the persons in the Caribbean, what matters to them. And as I think you mentioned, Owen Arthur was very concerned about, how we can communicate what we do for the people. And looking at the example of the EU, the two biggest things that people really appreciated was just one, freedom of movement. So you could visit your families who are elsewhere. You're not, trying to jump through all these hoops in terms of visas and all of this. And of course, freedom of movement to work. But basically, what matters to people is freedom of movement. And the second thing I can tell you that really was the biggest fillip, I think, in the EU's entire history, was when they removed all data roaming charges when people traveled in the EU. That was a tremendously successful and popular achievement. So with that one very serious and maybe, well, probably equally serious, but sounds frivolous, goal, when would you see these two goals being achieved? Full and free movement of people and removing of data charges?
Let's take the second one first. We have the unfortunate reality in that our telecommunications infrastructure in the region, which controls the internet services, are legacy systems from the same European owners who are now dropping the charges among each other in Europe. But when we get around the table with the subsidiaries in the region, it is really very difficult to negotiate to remove the charges. That's an ongoing conversation. There is a little bit of progress that was made late last year where I am advised, we were advised that among themselves there was an agreement to reduce the charges but not to eliminate totally. The objective is to eliminate totally. But as I say, the owners of those telecommunications companies are in each of our member states, and they negotiate with each of our member states their arrangements differently with each of our member states. The solution to all that is likely to be a single regulatory mechanism that would determine that across the region. That's a complexity yet to be negotiated. Until we do that, we have the untidy reality of providers establishing different companies in each country and establishing the relations with each. So that's an untidy reality. We are not at the level of, we don't have that regional superstructure that you have in the EU that makes some of those things easier to do. So the work is still there. And the question I would ask is, those who move within the region, whether you are feeling that reduction in roaming charges that was agreed last year and which is entirely in the purview of the telecommunications companies to roll out. That's something that we would want to know whether or not we're feeling that yet. As regards free movement of persons, the current arrangements provide that you can pick up and move from one CARICOM member state to the other and get an automatic stamp in a passport for 6 months. That doesn't give you the authority to work now. That gives you the authority to spend a holiday, get to know, visit your family, that kind of thing. There also is an agreement on movement of various categories of workers, and this is where I sometimes describe what we have done as not free movement, although what we say that's what the objective is, it's really been regulated movement. More and more that is being understood as a system that is not necessarily efficient. And I would like to think that there are likely to be conversations about removing some of those real barriers. The movement of skilled nationals requires an infrastructure in place in each member state, and that's added costs and all of that. And so there is a lot of work to be done there. To have people move freely would be, for me, opening to wider community building, because people moving from place to place and getting to know one another is one part of the community building process that we need to have in place. But as we discussed earlier, it's also about being able to move because of the transportation infrastructure issues that we've been talking about. I like to say that in the old days before we were invented, when we were all colonies of Her Majesty's empire, we could just get on a boat and go from one place to the other. There was no issue at all. But one of the realities of being invented as sovereign states is that we put in place regulations to manage the flow of persons from one place to another, and that's the reality that we live with. So we have to work through how to make it as smooth as possible.
Thank you. Let's take a question from the floor. We have quite a few from our online audience, so I would like to ask Dr. Barnett if you're willing to take at least one more from online as well.
Sure.
Okay.
This is not my question, SG, from St. Lucia. What are CARICOM's plans in respect of the blue and orange economies?
I'm sorry?
What are CARICOM's plans in respect of the blue and orange economies, from St. Lucia?
Okay. There is a lot of work being done on the blue economy. Discussions, I know there's some work being done in CDB. There are different actions being taken in member states. There's work being done here in Barbados. There's a lot of work being done in Belize. All of this is coordinated but not led by in the Sustainable Development Program that we have in the Secretariat keeps track of what's happening in the evolution of the blue economy. It is really critically important for us because it represents an opportunity for us to diversify our economic activities, to in some ways take control of what happens within our seas and become more involved in the development of the activities in relation to that. And of course, it's really important for us to do it in a sustainable way. So all of that is really taking place at that level. The orange economy, that's with culture and art and all of that. I wish there was more happening. There is a lot that happens at the member state level as well. There is a regional cultural policy that needs a push, that needs greater work to be done, because we know the extent to which our cultural artists, our painters, or all the aspects of the arts and culture have developed, have become really world leaders in what they can do and in representing what we represent. So there's a lot of potential there that we ought to be able to exploit, that we ought to be able to monetize, but it requires focused attention at the national level and at the regional level. So that's one of the areas that's important. But as Dame Billy and I looked at one another earlier this evening and said, we can't do everything all at the same time. And the urgent priority that's emerged as a result of the pandemic is the need for us to feed ourselves and then to be able to transport our produce and our people from place to place. And so those are the two top priorities that we are focusing our attention on this, at this time, even as we sort through the other important things that we talked about, such as mobilization of development financing and all of that. But culture, absolutely. And I don't like the color scheming, you know. I prefer to call it what it is, the color scheming, meaning the orange economy and the blue economy. It's all interrelated. They're not separated from one another. So we talk about, you know, we talk about the blue economy as if it's a little, no, it's related to all aspects of the economy. And culture, the way we live, work, entertain, enjoy, express ourselves artistically, that's part of our culture generally, and it's how we work, it's how we live. So let's not separate them into different parts as if they're not related to one another.
Thank you. So the question I'm going to take from the CDB's Facebook, and then we have one more question, final, last, since we were talking about Africa and Caribbean. Burna Boy said last, that's the last question. So the
so
question...
you have last, and last.
No, we're just going to two, just to last today. So the question from the CDB Facebook, and it's a double-barrel question, so maybe it's last in truth. The person asks, how is civil society being included in practical ways into the design, planning, implementation, monitoring, and oversight of the development priorities of CARICOM? And the person continues to ask a question about accessibility standards for persons with disabilities across the region. How is CARICOM seeking to address the gaps and assure greater inclusion of persons with disabilities in the sustainable development process?
Okay, the first one, which was in relation to including representatives of civil society.
Yes, they asked about the implementation, monitoring, and oversight of the development priorities via civil society.
That is a matter that we want to have a conversation with civil society about. Okay. Because it's my own view that we have not sufficiently involved civil society in our conversation, but it is not really only about having a meeting once a year, which is what would have been done in the past. It's really about how we manage our collaboration, our conversation, to ensure that the civil society is involved in what we do. So that's a conversation, and members of civil society should expect to hear from us in the near future, in the quite near future, in fact. And in Suriname at our heads meeting, there was a side discussion of ensuring that we engage with civil society in advance of next year's meeting so that we can more properly involve civil society in the matters of the community. So we're going to be following up on that, and we're going to be reaching out to representatives of civil society across the region to see how we can do that better. And in relation to accessibility for persons with disabilities, I think most of our countries now have in place legislation that provides for that. That's not something we do at the regional level. At the regional level, we discuss, ensure that there are policies that we would want to see member states implement. We have a rapporteur who is a member of staff of the University of the West Indies, in fact, who is from Jamaica, who is representative of and provides advice on matters of accessibility and all matters related to ensuring that persons with disabilities have access to rights, have access to earn a living, have access to physical access as necessary, and all of that we've not been good in our member states over the years in providing all of these. It's a work in progress. But it is a priority for us in the region, and we do have an arrangement where within our human and social development, part of the work that we do, where the focus on disabilities is seeking to push to ensure that member states do implement those actions that are necessary to ensure that persons with disabilities are able to earn a living and live their lives fully.
Okay, thank you. And our final question.
Thank you very much, SG, for your very informative presentation. Just one question about the role of the private sector, especially in terms of food security. In your presentation, you indicated that the private sector is more interested in importing food rather than investing in our local producers. And we see the impact this is having on the health of our community, the NCDs, etc., because of the importation of food which is poor in quality. What is the Secretariat doing to encourage our private sector to invest more in our local production, our local producers and local agriculture as a whole? Thank you.
The agri-food systems agenda that we are implementing, and when I say we, I don't mean the Secretariat. Remember, the Secretariat is an administrative body. Implementation happens at member states level. The agri-food systems agenda includes ministries of agriculture, it includes farmers at the member state level, it includes the private sector, in terms of encouraging investment by the private sector in the agri-food systems production. One of the interesting developments that we've had more recently is a process where we're inviting farmers, private sector investors to let us know, us meaning all of us in this, let us know what their projects are that they're seeking to implement so that they can be given access to what may be possible in terms of expertise, financing, and all of that. This is not to suggest that there's a let me put it this way. In the two expos that we've had so far, one in Guyana and one in Trinidad and Tobago, what we had was the coming together of those who are in the private sector wanting to become more involved in food production, those who are not necessarily involved in food production but are importers of food to see the extent to which they can import food from within the region. And so it is that business-to-business collaboration that we are expecting will yield result in terms of promoting production, promoting internal transportation, promoting internal consumption nationally and regionally of more healthy food. Because you are right, part of what happens with importation of processed food is that processing food implies preservatives, implies salt, which is the foremost preservative that we've ever known, and oils and fats and those kinds of things. So the idea is food and nutrition security, and that involves production, that involves investment, because that's critical. We have financial institutions that have indicated an ability to make available resources through the banking system for investment in agricultural production. So hopefully all of that, which is receiving a lot of attention and a lot of positive attention, will yield the desired result, which is expanded production and expanded consumption of healthier food. And expanded production, of course, that means economic activity. So
thank you.
That's what we're looking for.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Barnett, for indulging all of the members of our in-person audience who had questions, as well as some of those in our online audience. I have to apologize for some of the persons online for not being able to get to their questions, because although they started with a trickle, they ended as a flood. I can send them to you if you would like to see them, just to
Yes,
see
I
what
would,
people
I would,
are.
I would like to see them. I would not promise to answer every single one because that's time consuming, but it would give us an idea of the issues that are important that we need to answer as we speak in different places, as I ask my person there who is, as I ask Salas to help us to put the messages out, it would be important and it would be very useful for us to know what are the things that are on the mind of people in the community.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. The question and answer section, I believe, truly enriched your talk even more, although it was so rich to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Barnett, we need you just one more time. I promise not to work this time at all. Apologies. I think the mark of a truly great discussion and lecture is that people just want more and more and more, and I'm only sorry that we don't have more time for you to regale us with your thoughts on this topic. But let me, on behalf of the SRC and the CDB, the co-host of this event, thank you so much. I know it was very much of a sacrifice for you to be here. I know that you were here and then had to come back. So we really appreciate it. We really appreciate your thoughts and your thinking and the direction that you're willing to take the Caribbean community in under your leadership. I think we're assured that it is in a very, very steady and capable hands. So thank you so much, and please accept this as a very small but heartfelt appreciation on behalf of the co-host of this lecture series. So thank you so much. It is my simple task now to bring some closing remarks to tonight's distinguished lecture series. I feel that Prime Minister Arthur is somewhere looking down and saying, finally, people can sit down for a good 2.5 hours and think about some of the trading issues confronting the region. And it's a feeling I share. We often, those of us in the trenches in trade, we want more time dedicated to our issues and more thoughtful discussion dedicated. So let me thank you on behalf of PM Arthur for continuing the legacy and staying with us for the whole 2.5 hours as I bring tonight's lecture to an end. Let me sincerely thank and express to the family, Sabrina, Mrs. Arthur, and all of those who are here assembled, as well as those looking online, for consenting to and participating in the convening of this lecture series. Also, obviously, to Ms. Leah Arthur, thank you for taking time out of what we know are your diligent studies to record your message, and we take the opportunity to wish you all the best in continuing with these studies. Many thanks to our distinguished speaker tonight, Dr. Barnett, for your willingness to present here. A lot of what you said resonated with us at the Srinath Ramphal Center. A lot of the topics that you broached are topics that our students studiously look into, and it's topics that I have discussed with your representative here, Ambassador McCook, about ways that we can really channel some of our thinking together with the CDB and come up with some solutions for the region. And so I'm sure Professor Landis will not think me out of turn to say that the university continues to be at your disposal in helping to chart the path and the thought processes forward. I know we have some academics right here in our midst, and I encourage you all to work with us to advance some of the thinking even more on trade and trade issues. To the team at the CDB, allow me on behalf of the board and the management and the staff at the SRC to extend our eternal gratitude as we continue to partner on this annual event and remember Professor Arthur as a Caribbean son and an ardent regionalist and a strong voice for small and vulnerable economies. Let me also thank all of tonight's speakers and panel members, those of you who gave of your time and generously gave of your thinking to be here and present your views to the audience. To you, the live audience who stayed the course with us, and our online audience, many thanks for joining us tonight as we explored with Dr. Barnett the future of CARICOM by charting a vision for the region's economic advancement. As we continue to be inspired and reflect on what we have heard tonight, the team here at the SRC and the wider campus community will continue to do our part to chart a path forward to face and help to fix the region's ongoing challenges. I thank you very much, and let me again thank those of you here and those on the audience for attending the second lecture series in honor of a great man, regionalist, thinker, academic, mentor. Put your hands together wherever he is. The Right Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur. Thank you all very much.
Hi, I am Aurelia Bruce, graduate of the Masters in International Trade Policy MITP program from the UWI SRC. Now, the MITP program is a robust program for anyone interested in international development, trade policy, trade law, and trade economics. The program is both practical and technical in nature, giving graduates the skills and tools that professionals in the field ought to have, and exposes learners to all spheres of international trade. The program has definitely launched my international career, and I'm sure the career of many other graduates, so what are you waiting on?
Hi guys, Matt Barrett, MITP class of 2010. Currently the head of business development and partner sales for Study Group North America. The MITP course gave me the skills and built my network to ultimately become successful in international business, so I am grateful as an alumni of the MITP program at the University of the West Indies.
In Southern Africa. I graduated from the University of the West Indies with a Master of Science in International Trade Policy in 2010. My qualification from the University of the West Indies has been a gateway to the global trade policy arena and has enhanced my understanding of the workings of the geopolitical economy. Selecting this world-class institution with a diverse cultural background was the best decision I have ever made for my professional growth.